Hey Maria, how are you doing?
I am great, Shovik. It's so good to see you. How are
Well,
you?
great to see you too. I just realized that in December, I just wanted to hang out with you, and in order to do that, I had to like come up with a project. But yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about this. I know we have
You
been.
promised me a trip to LA. You promised that you were going to come visit me,
It'll
and I'm
happen.
so excited. And then you're like, womp womp. Never mind.
Work got a little crazy, but it'll happen. Now I have some downtime, so it'll totally happen. So I wanted to talk through you with this like super crazy idea. So I have some time off at work, and I'm not going anywhere. So I wanted to like see what I can come up with for the GMAT Club folks to do something like that I haven't done before, right? Something totally unique. So I was, just eavesdropping in the latest MBA conversations. Like people are applying, getting interview invites, and I feel like the dynamic has changed quite a bit since the last time I applied, which was, like 4 years ago. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to see if I was applying all over again, right, with somewhat similar experience, but adding some of the stuff that I've been doing post MBA. I already have a GMAT because I took like the GMAT very recently when they changed to online and did all those funny things.
Right.
Can I actually reapply to business schools and then just see what happens and just not tell them that I did an MBA? So I want to pause and just get your overall thoughts on that idea.
I mean, I don't think it's super duper like super legal. I mean, I don't think it's illegal. I don't think you'll like go to jail or anything. Um, but I mean, it would be clear. It would become pretty clear at some point. You'd either have to completely lie or not completely lie on the resume, but you would absolutely need to move up the dates of your college graduation. You would probably have to cut out some of. I remember working with you that you started off as an engineer and then you did teach for India, and then
Yeah.
you were doing some pretty awesome stuff in the education nonprofit sector in India, and then you went to business school. So if you were to apply right now with an updated resume of the Shovik of today, it wouldn't work because not that you're old, but
I'm pretty old. I feel much older.
you are still a spring chicken to me in my eyes, but in the eyes of an admissions committee at your current age and experience level. So I think if you were to do it, I don't think you could do it. I mean, you could do whatever you want. No one's stopping you from hitting submit. But if you're going to pretend to be an applicant again, I think you would have to, obviously you would have to leave off that you already have an MBA from Ross, and I think you would have to change around the resume to make it seem like you're actually
Yeah.
4 to 5 years younger. You would have to eliminate, whether you want to eliminate, you would probably eliminate that first engineering job that you had.
Yeah.
And then
Probably.
maybe cut down some of the education sector stuff and focus more on your current job, which is in the tech sector.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I wanted to get out of with this, I mean, sure, there's like some personal enjoyment there, but the other thing also was I see a lot of folks on GMAT Club like really just literally cramming to get in their round two applications. And I think part of that is, unfortunate decisions from round one, right? So they didn't expect it, so had to start all over again, and they just don't have a lot of time. The other group of people, that applied to round two that I see on GMAT Club is that MBA was not kind of on their radar, or it was on their radar, but the GMAT just wasn't working out, and it finally did. And so they didn't do a lot of application work in parallel with the GMAT, right? So now they have like only a couple of weeks to throw in round two application. So I wanted to also lay out that process, like what would it take for someone like me who has been pretty out of the MBA game for quite a while now, but close enough to know what it generally takes to put together a decent application. To write an application from scratch, and like have it submit ready by the first week of January. Like, so doing the whole thing, like starting off with, what are the schools, right? Then goals, and then figuring out my personal stories and branding, and then translating them into essays, figuring out recommendations. Like, I think those are all the steps. So I wanted to prove that with sufficient time and diligence, I can get all of that done in 2 weeks. Now, do you think not going to happen?
I mean, I definitely think it's feasible. I think it's obviously, I like to quip that nobody ever said, oh no, I spent too much time on my business school application. Like, I've never heard anyone be like, if I could do it all over again, I would have spent a lot less time on it. No one ever says that, right?
Yeah.
Because first of all, it's human nature to procrastinate. And I also think when people are first encountering this process, there is this misconception that the GMAT is like 90% of the admissions decision.
Yeah.
And I just need to get that out of the way. And if I get like a 750 or 760, I'm getting into Harvard easy peasy. And it's like, well, that's not really how it works. And there's a severe underestimation of either how complicated it is to write the essays or how important the essays, resumes, all of the written components of the application, they are actually in many ways more important as I think we have talked about on multiple previous occasions. A low score can keep you out, but a high score doesn't get you in automatically. And in fact, a really compelling professional leadership background can overcome a low score. So, and if you can tell, if you have that first of all, you have to have the background. The best essay in the world for someone who has just been sort of like a very low level, someone who's just basically QAing software, they can write a Pulitzer Prize winning essay, but they're not going to get in because they haven't had the actual track record of leadership.
Right.
But anyway, can you do it in 2 weeks? I think you can. I have had people who, I don't know if I'm allowed to point out the Applicant Lab product on this video, but I've had people say, like, I signed up for Applicant Lab and I was able to get through like 5 things in a week. I took a week off work. I went through Applicant Lab and I got like 5 applications in. I do not recommend that anyone do that.
No, I plan on.
It's not an endorsement of waiting until the last minute, but it is possible if you concentrate. And I think the other thing that's important to do with only 2 weeks left is do not waste time on superfluous things. So don't waste a ton of time. I don't know, like you do need to do some research on each school that you're applying to, and it depends on the school. Different schools want to see different levels of commitment and research, but you also don't want to, don't spend like 7 days just digging into the course catalog at Darden, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think totally. I think one of the things that I learned applying to business schools in 2018, and I applied to like a ton of schools, and that because you helped me through it. And one of the things that I learned was, I think I was using Applicant Lab to flesh out my stories. But a lot of that was common work, and I tell the story to people. So I applied to this higher ranked school in New York City, and 3 days before the application deadline of a slightly lower rank, but just as prestigious school in New York City, I decided that, hey, I have most of the stuff already. Here's my love letter to New York City. Can I throw an application together for this school? And it took me like one evening and like one email to my recommenders. And my recommenders were like super kind people. So they were fine with it. And guess what? I got in. I put in such little effort. I got in with like a scholarship. So I feel like I want to rely on some of those muscles as well. And even if I don't get to apply to schools, I still want to maybe leverage some of GMAT Club partners to actually review the application content and make a decision on whether this is like interview worthy. And then go through the interview process and then have a decision from them, which is going to be blind so that they don't know it's me. Most GMAT Club partners tend to know me, though, which is a problem.
It's like Lady Gaga does an open mic night. We're gonna we kind of know who you are.
All right, cool.
But so, I do want to just quickly point out, I think something you just said was really important, that there are a lot of the fundamental work that you do for the application process. It's a lot to do, but once you do it, you can sort of, massage it or move it around for different schools. That's absolutely right. You can't submit the same essay for every school. That gets kind of obvious, but that fundamental work, that reflection that you do on, okay, what are my best stories? What have my best experiences been? What are the things that are most going to impress them? Why do I even want an MBA? Which is something that a lot of school, like for people who are applying, it's often they're like, well, it's obvious. I want to make more money, right? I want to go to business school. I want to make more money. And so why are you even asking me? But the schools really want to know. But once you come up with a reason for why you want an MBA, you can use that same reason for every school. So that's a really good point, that once you get that fundamental work out of the way, with the exception of a few applications out there that are genuinely tough, like Stanford and Harvard. But after those two kind of those weird applications, and MIT is also a tricky one. But a lot of the other schools, it's just, I don't want to say it, but you kind of just rearrange it. And so once you get the first one out of the way, like you said, the next ones, it just gets easier and easier.
No, totally. I think the three schools where I felt I had to think through them for way longer was Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. And Yale, especially with the commitment essay. And I don't like the commitment essay. It just I just think like it's very hard to, at least for me, to write that commitment essay and not come off as someone who is disingenuous. I just can't speak like that. Like, here is my biggest commit. Oh, okay, whatever. We are going to talk about Yale in like big terms in just a little bit, but the Yale application, I mean. So I think I wanted to chat with you about the process. So I select schools. That's my first step because I want to look for alignment first. So for schools, what I was thinking was, let me actually share my screen. I have So one quick thing for people who are watching, I'm going to document all of this in a shared Google Doc. So that Google Doc will have all my stories, my raw notes, my essays, my resume, everything. And I'll make it available for public viewing just in case you want to see through the whole process. But of course, like, you won't be able to edit it. Like, I don't want to wake up tomorrow and have everything go away. So let me share my screen and we can, right now it's super empty. So there's not a lot of stuff in there, but hopefully with time, we're going to fill most of this up. So for schools, what I was thinking was Michigan, because I just want to have fun with them. And I know the admissions team really, really well, and I hope they're not watching the video. And I just want to have some fun. And I think Michigan is the only place where I can get away with doing something like this, and they would still be kind to me. So I do want to try either HBS or Stanford, like one of those two, because why not, right? I just want to see. Wharton is a super straightforward application. So it just feels, and the Wharton website is just so fantastic. Like, there's just so much information in the Wharton website. Feel like I can get away with crafting the essays pretty quickly. Yeah. Stern, I felt like is one school that a lot of people apply to. So I want to be able to have the GMAT club audience look at Michigan and Stern. That's thousands of people, so that I can walk through some of that application process. And I think Michigan and Stern are also my best candidates to see admit viability. Like, if I can put together a 2-week application, like Harvard, Stanford are crapshoots anyway. But if I can put together decent enough applications for Michigan and Stern, can I actually make it like an achievable type of like an 8 out of 10 type of an application that can actually get me in? So those are some of the schools that I'm thinking. Do you have any thoughts on anything more to add or take away from?
So I think that I would say I think that your rationale makes sense, especially given that you are Shovik from GMAT Club, the GMAT Club celebrity. I do think, though, a lot of people, they might want to start the process, instead of going from schools to goals, to start with their goals and then start to choose the schools from there accordingly. Just because people who are not familiar with the differences between schools might say, well, I'm just going to apply to the top 5 schools. Well, what do you want to do? I want to do real estate. Okay, in that case, your number 1 school is Columbia, right? Your number 1 school, your number 1, number 2 schools are Columbia and Wharton. Your number 1, you know what I mean? Like, in terms of what schools offer, who they send where, what specializations they have, what companies does their career services team have strong relations. So if you say, I want to work for Amazon, Ross immediately comes to mind, of course. So so I would say that for the purposes of this exercise, let's move forward with the schools that you picked. But I think a lot of people, if you're just getting started right now, this is a good use of your time. Number 1, think about, what is it I want to do? What kind of job do I want to get out of business school? and then start to pick your schools from there. So for example, investment banking, a lot of people don't know this, but Cornell has an excellent pathway into investment banking for people who have not done investment banking before. So if somebody wants to switch into investment banking, their top schools should be Wharton, Columbia, NYU, and Cornell. Yeah. And so don't just go by like, well, I'm going to apply to 5 schools, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of the overall rankings. So I think start with the career goals and then pick your schools from there. But since if we assume that your goals are product management in the technology space, I think these are pretty good ones.
So here's where I think you may actually disagree with my school. So here's the goals that I'm thinking. So I want to pitch myself as someone who moved to the education sector straight out of undergrad, right? Like you mentioned, taught for 2 years, did a little bit of work with ed tech companies and not-for-profits. I'll also talk through some of my GMAT club experience, possibly. And then I want to talk about, having 2 years of work in a big tech company. And this could be, without getting an MBA. So when I actually applied to schools, I was kind of honest with my goals. So my goal was eventually I want to be an entrepreneur in the ed tech space. And in order to do that, I need to learn how products get built with help of a Microsoft, Amazon, or Apple, or whatever. So that's what I'm doing right now. So in the next set of application, how I want to pitch these things, right? I want to keep my goal as the same, right? Eventually, I want to be to start my own thing in the ed tech space, but I kind of want to now I have experience working in the grassroots of ed tech, right? And I have experience in shipping products at scale. So I think what I'm lacking here is how investment decisions get made. How do companies actually bootstrap, and how do companies reach different geographies and build that network. So with that goal in mind, what I'm targeting for my post MBA, and feel free to tell me if this is crazy, is VC focused on edtech. So there are a lot of edtech companies, a lot of VCs that entirely focus on edtech across America and worldwide. Actually, India has a few really big edtech companies, massively funded, and I have very strong thoughts about that. But I think it's a pretty fledgling space. I think people are hiring, but not necessarily a very conventional post MBA kind of a route. So I wanted to pause and take your thoughts on that one, and if that changes your feedback around my school selection.
So I will say that, first of all, if you do apply with a more investment focused story, then your schools make even more sense than they did before. If you were targeting the product manager story, I was actually going to say maybe I'd swap out an NYU with a Kellogg. Sure. I think Kellogg is harder to get into, but Kellogg has a very robust product management program. But if you're talking about more trying to move into the financial side of things, then you've definitely, you've got a New York school in there. So
yeah.
And with Wharton, sorry, my eyes are okay. Wharton's there too. So
let me increase the font size. This is not easy to read.
I'm also, my eyes are falling apart. Okay, perfect. So I think that makes sense. I think one thing though that's interesting that you brought up that I think everyone watching needs to think about is if you are proposing a large career shift from what you do today to what you want to do in the future, the onus is on you to show the school that story, if it's not a very traditional story, like your story is not, VC and ed tech, like you said, it's a relatively fledgling field. It's not like, oh, we've got a pipeline and we just shovel hundreds of people every year into that pipeline. Right. Then the more unique your career vision is, the onus is on you to prove to the admissions office that you can get that job. So what you would have to do in order to make that not be sort of immediately suspicious or suspect is you'd have to talk to at least one person who works at a VC, right, tech, so at least even just general VC, and say to them, look, here's my background: engineering major, product manager now at a big tech company, some time in the classroom. What do you think? Would I be hireable right out of business school, or do I need to spend a couple of years doing something else first?
Right.
My understanding, and you probably have a better sense of this than I do, just given how much younger you are. But my sense is that I feel like I'm hearing that a lot of VC firms are happy to hire a ton of summer interns and basically pay them nothing. But then at the end, when it's time to actually graduate and get that full-time job, I think that's a little more elusive. So my initial gut reaction to what you said is that I think VC as a long-term goal could be an interesting one. But I wonder if VC immediately out of business school, if it's seen as being completely unrealistic, or like, oh shoot, we only send like 2 people a year into VC and they're people who already did something very different from what Shovik did. If they can't pattern match your background with a post MBA job in VC, I think that all else being equal, it actually does damage someone's chances.
Right.
So
I did some of the research. So I felt some of the VCs that have focused recruitment or work related to due diligence, I think I'll be a really good fit at that, because I kind of have a good sense of ed tech and I kind of have a good sense of just building technical products. I think what I might be dinged at is just not having like a big finance background. You know what I mean? Or like a big consulting background. Because I think those two things, or like private equity, whatever, I think those typical finance things just generally have a leg up for VC related jobs. So I was thinking about, what would be my plan B, right? So if I don't do VC, like what would my plan B be? Which, by the way, is probably a really cool thing for everybody to do for their goals, right?
yes.
So my plan B was centered around starting an edtech company, like right after business school, because I think when I applied the last time, there were a lot of uncertainties. Like I was coming from India, I was poor, so I needed to get a job to pay off my student loans. I don't have those restraints anymore. Like, so not like I've paid off the entirety of my student loans, but like I'm getting there. So, I can actually take risks after business school. Like I don't have to go for like the most available job straight out, right? I can actually be selective. That's a weird feeling. But wondering what your thoughts are on like straight up entrepreneurship. I think a lot of business schools have incubation built into them, right? So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
So I think, again, for the purposes of the application, I do think that you are going to, for this fake application, you are going to need to curb back a little bit what your current title and compensation are. Because if they actually know that you are literally at a post-MBA role, post-MBA title, post-MBA salary, it's like, well, you don't need this degree, or just do the 1-year tech MBA from Cornell or NYU. Like, what are you doing here? So given that most people applying to business school do not yet have that financial cushion that you're referring to, I think I am not a huge fan of saying I'm going to start an ed tech company right out of school, or any company right out of school, because as you know personally, those student loan payments come due 6 months after you graduate.
Yeah.
And so unless someone has a partner that financially supports them, or they're already independent, they already have that financial cushion, most people, even if they come into business school planning to be entrepreneurs, they realize they have to get a day job just to pay, if for no other reason than to pay back the loans. So I think in your case, I would say that you've got the education background, you've got the tech background, but after business school, you want to meld them together and go work for an ed tech company like Khan Academy, or I don't know, Byju's, or whatever it is. And then then that will combine it. And then you can move up from there.
Right.
Or you could say that you want to work like in the technology, like once you've done the homework of like, okay, what are some other paths? If the VC goal is a long-term goal, maybe something like doing an investment banking job in the tech, for the TMT, or, the tech group of an investment bank, for example, might be a better route.
That makes sense. I think my question with that one was like, let's say, by the way, like I have spoken to people who are like a product manager of a really big tech company, but not post MBA. So they got in so a lot of these big tech companies would have somewhat entry level product management roles. Like Google has a associate product manager role. Facebook has a rotational product manager role, and they hire out of undergrads, right? And just because tech and whatever happened with tech in the last couple of years, 4 or 5 years in those jobs, like they are definitely making more than post MBA jobs in those same companies, right? So I think there is some precedence here where people in these companies who are applying to business school to move to a totally different career field just make a lot of money, so they can. Again, when I say by a lot of money, I mean super relative. I still live in a one-bedroom apartment, um, but I think there is some precedence there. But at the same time, I think my pushback to the Khan Academy or Udemy goal would be like, what's stopping me from doing it right now? Like I can like, with sufficient prep and networking, I could probably get a job at Udemy or Khan Academy. Like Khan Academy, I don't know because they are super lean, but I could probably get a job there, right, without an MBA. If I had, like, not assuming a post MBA experience in Amazon, but even like a pre MBA product manager type experience, do you think I will have a hard time getting a job at Udemy?
So I don't. So I think there are sort of fundamentally two groups of applicants. There are the applicants that need that MBA to make the career switch, right?
Right.
The engineer who wants to work in investment banking, you basically need an MBA to make that switch. Then there are the people who don't technically need it, but who still want it. And for those people, the argument needs to be more of a long-term view. Yeah, you don't need an MBA to get that job at whatever, clever.com or whatever there's like 4 million ed tech companies out there. That Clever might not even be one. But anyway, I'm trying to think like, my God, in the past year, my kid used like 45 different platforms for remote learning. And now I'm drawing a blank on all of them. You don't need an MBA to get that job. The question is, would the MBA be useful for you in the long term in terms of not guaranteeing your success, but at least giving you a well-rounded skill set, teaching you things about management, et cetera, such that it helps boost your chances of success in the longer term. And so for the people who technically don't need the MBA, that's where the argument comes from. It's more like, I don't need the MBA to get to those higher echelons of management.
Right.
But once I get there, I don't want to screw it up. I mean, that was basically my argument because I didn't need an MBA for what I did. And when the CEO of my company was like, "What are you doing?" What, he's like, you're going to get there. Like, just, you're on your way. And I was like, yeah, but I get that. But I've seen so many people get that job, mess it up, and then get fired. Like, I want to. So I think that would be your argument, right? That you understand the tech stuff completely, but boy, oh boy, you don't know how to read a balance sheet. So that's something you need. Or maybe you've been doing product stuff, but maybe you haven't had a lot of management experience. So that's another big thing you need. Or you've never done a lot of marketing work. So it's identifying those gaps,
right?
Educational gaps that you currently have.
Cool. I think that makes sense to me. By the way, I got a weird notification. Can you still hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Cool. So I think I'm getting a good sense of schools and goals. I might play around with the schools. Like Michigan Ross is something that I'm inclined to like maybe change because that's just the fruit is hanging way too low there. But so I'm gonna start working on my resume. So we talked about this a little bit, but so I mentioned that I'm gonna move up my graduation date just a little bit. I'm gonna talk through moving to teach for India, teaching for a couple years. And then moving to ed tech and some of the not-for-profit stuff, and then moving to a big tech company for like a pre-MBA PM role, right? Because why I want to talk about the big tech company is because I think I've had several opportunities of leadership in the last year and a half, right? So I want to in some way talk about them, right? Mm-hmm. So that's pretty much it. So I think that in total puts me at about 6 years of work experience, 6 to 7 years out of graduation, which is kind of what I had when I applied to business schools. So what would be your idea of things that I should highlight in my resume?
Well, anyone who has seen any of my previous webinars on the resume, or if you jump in and the Applicant Lab free trial, I've got this for free. You don't even have to pay me for this. But the resume, a big problem that a big mistake that a lot of people make is they use the same resume that they would use for applying for a job, for job hunting in the MBA application. You are not going to do that. you need to keep in mind that admissions officers are looking for people, not someone, they want people who are going to get hired 2 years from now when they graduate. But what they really want, especially the more elite the school, the higher the hope is for you. They're looking for people who 20 years from now are going to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for good things, not for like Ponzi schemes, right? And so they're looking for people who have demonstrated, like, look, I'm obviously not a CEO of a huge company yet because I'm 27, but I am going to get there. And here's the evidence that I have not just the intellect. The intellect comes through on the GMAT score. So don't waste a lot of time on your resume being like, look at how smart I am. Here is a bullet point. I created an algorithm that used AI to do, who cares? What matters a lot more is your interpersonal skills. So highlight in any of the roles that you're going to leave in, highlight what people skills you needed to make an accomplishment happen. So let's say that you built a new feature at Amazon. Instead, if you were applying for your next product manager job, you might say something like, oh, we used Jira as a ticketing system, or I don't know what system you're using, but I helped track things on this such and such software product management tool. For business school, that wouldn't matter. But for business school, what would matter would be something like, I convinced the chief product officer to nix this project, or I convinced the CEO that we should instead launch a different product. Right. So it's more about showing that you have the ability to persuade people over whom you have no direct authority. For example, that's a great type of thing to highlight. Showing that if there was a big team that was maybe geographically distributed around the world, and maybe at first the communication wasn't great, did you come in and help, like, okay, guys, like, let's get on the same page, go team, let's do it, right? Those interpersonal skills are what you need to show, because those interpersonal skills are what separate the people in the long term who tend to make it higher in the ranks of the business world.
Right.
So highlight those as much as possible.
That makes sense. Yeah, I was trying to think about, thinking through my accomplishments at work in 3 categories. I think one that kind of shows that I've been able to deliver stuff, like, push things to completion in like a reduced time frame, or where that led to better than expected outcomes, right? Because resume greatest hits, you taught me well. The second type of accomplishment that I want to focus on my resume is when I had influence over people that I did not work with, or they didn't have any incentive to agree with me. Like, something that you mentioned on having influence without authority, and the outcome of some of those decisions. And the third one, I think I want to talk about a little bit on how I was mentoring people, right, who were probably in my shoes 5-6 years after me. I think that's available in most of my stories, even in Amazon. So I want to talk through those 3 things, as my essays would also talk about those 3 things as my big, broad stories, right? So I want someone who reads my resume, and then if that person again reads my essays, there should be some recollection. Like, it should not look like, oh, these 2 are totally different people, right? Like, your resume was all about this, but your essays are totally different. So I think you had a phrase on, like, your essays being the stories behind your bullets.
Yes.
So I think I think I want to do that, and I want to define those bullets and in my resume, thinking that I will translate them into essays later.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. The essays should be the story behind the bullet point. I'm so proud of you for remembering that, actually.
That was a pretty stressful time, so I kind of went hard on the.
You're traumatized. You're traumatized from the stress applied to business school, so that's why these are seared into your brain forever. Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely it. So even so when you start thinking about the resume and the essays, they have to sort of flow together and complement each other.
Right.
So what does that mean? It means that the essays, first of all, don't talk about a whole story in the essays that I'm like, where, like you just said, like, where is this, right? I've had people be like, oh, I want to go work for a nonprofit after business school because I've been volunteering with this reading literacy start, and I'm like, where is that? And they're like, oh, well, I didn't think it was important enough. I'm like, ah. So yes. So anything that is important enough, you don't have to, don't tell the story in the resume, but allude to it and then tell the story in the essay. Conversely, in the essay, don't just copy and paste or reword something from the resume, because I'm like, I already know this from the resume. And also try to avoid, especially for Harvard, try to, and the higher up the school is, try to avoid wasting space, because Harvard doesn't have a word count. So they give you plenty of rope to hang yourself with. A lot of people are like, no word count, woohoo, I'm just going to write 45 pages. The problem is that you actually do yourself in if you write too much. So the thing is, in the essay is, don't then explain. When I say tell me the story behind the bullet point, I also mean tell me the unexpected elements of the story behind the bullet point. So if you say something like, okay, I delivered this product earlier, right? Let's say that's one of your bullets, right? Delivered a product that made $3 million, 3 months early, 20% earlier than expected.
Right.
If in the essay you're like, well, first I called a meeting, then I put together a project plan. Then it's like, well, obviously that's something you like. Anyone who knows anything about being a product manager would be like, well, of course there would be a meeting involved at some point. So don't waste a lot of words in the essay telling me stuff that's obvious, that I could guess happened. Yeah. But you tell me about the fact that maybe your boss suddenly had to take an emergency leave of absence, and so you had to step in to manage the client, or someone on your team, I don't know, got trapped in an airport somewhere because of COVID, and so you had to scramble to, or it was the day before the deadline and someone was like, wait a minute, this isn't the product I wanted. This is completely wrong. And so how did you manage that? So those are the stories behind the bullet point that I wouldn't have guessed. And that's where you're going to get the highest bang for your buck. Again, telling me what are some of those interpersonal challenges that you face. Not like, oh, I discovered a bug, so I fixed the bug. That's not as impressive.
So I think one question that I have for you, and I know we are kind of running out of time here, so I'll try to wrap it up quickly. I think one question that I had for you was, I think I'm pretty good on my not-for-profit side, my ed tech side. Some of my stories from my, so I work in an extremely technical product. Like it's for most people, it's highly abstract, right? And it's kind of supposed to be that way, right? The reason why we want to talk about a cloud is just say cloud is it's because we don't want to get into the details, because the details are just too murky, right? So a big part of my accomplishments in my latest job has been to drive decisions where multiple leaders in the org were just not in agreement with each other, right? So when I try to translate that, and I think those are powerful stories. I think those were I'm very proud of them, and they have a lot of like that interpersonal relationship and figuring out who to listen to and how to convince someone. Like, I think those are good parts there, but I'm kind of struggling with translating the actual use case into something that my reader would understand. So do I have to go there at all, or how high level do I have to go before I get like stab myself?
I like all the murder references. I'm like, they give you enough rope to hang yourself with, and you're like, I'm going to stab myself. So I think so first of all, again, if we think about the fact as you're crafting your application, don't just do each piece in a vacuum. Think about like, okay, I can talk about this little bit on the resume, and then in one of the essays, I can go into more detail. So if you want to go into the fact that let's say there were 3 different vice presidents that couldn't agree, and you got them to agree and you moved the project forward, there are a couple of different levels of detail that you could go into on the resume. On the resume, you could simply say, I delivered this project, I delivered a stalled project 30% faster than it was going to be delivered.
Right.
And this, a project that was worth $100 million or whatever. Or you could even take it a little step further and say, delivered a $100 million project 3 months earlier than expected by convincing 3 vice presidents to, some sort of concessions or compromise,
Sure.
convincing by convincing a stalled, 3 vice presidents that had stalled the project. This is not great wording, but due to compromise in order to push things forward. So you could totally put that in a resume. And then in the essay, you explain, like, here's what I did. So
I think I have to, like, when I write those narratives, I have to figure out where my guardrails are, because I think when I start about, like, some of those compromises, for example, it's like, yeah, this senior principal engineer was really worried about the security implication of building our API this way, and I think that's where I start to, like, lose people. So I have to figure out a way to be high level enough for people to continue reading, but also give them some specific details where they understand the gravity of the project.
So I think the line that someone should be aware of is, I try to say, imagine that you were telling this story to someone who is well educated but is not at all in your world. So off the top of my head, I tend to say your dentist, right? Let's say you're at your dentist's office and the dentist is, like, getting ready to go in and they're like, so how's it going? And if you were to say to me, oh God, at work I had this engineer who was so worried about the security of our new product that he almost derailed the entire thing. I actually think that that's something that a person who is relatively well educated, even if they know nothing about cloud computing, anything, they will understand security is an issue. But if you were to say, I would leave, like, API out of it, for example.
Sure.
But if you were to say, yeah, like, oh, well, he thought, I wanted to put this up on the GitHub and put the repository on the GitHub, whatever, like, the dentist is not going to be like, whoop, they're not going to get that. So that's kind of, I originally started out years ago saying, well, explain it like you would to your grandmother, but then that's not quite right, because grandmothers are of a different, they're too far out. But someone like who's like a peer who is like a doctor.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I think that's a good reference on the dentist side of things. I'm not going to mention API specs on my essay. I'll try not to. I think recommenders, I don't have a lot to say. I think I've been through this journey before. So I think what I need to do is, even if I don't do the actual application and actually submit to schools, I'll try to get a person that I work closely with, and I'll try to, like, buy them dinner to write a recommendation letter for me, so that I can come back and talk about it, and I can highlight, like, what's the good in this letter and what can be improved. Cool. So that's my process. So I think we are meeting again on Monday at 8:00. I want to start off with, so I'll spend some time this weekend to work on, like, a fictitious resume, and I'll fully expect you to rip into that. So I think we want to talk about the resume stuff maybe on Monday, and I think by then I'll also have a good idea on just adding some narratives on those bullet points that I can then use for essays.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Maria. It was so great to have you again. And I think I'm going to see you a lot over the next 2 weeks, I guess, where you'll be like the judgment of, my reapplication. I can't believe I'm doing this again.
Anytime with you is good time, Shovik, but especially if it's time that I get to spend ripping apart a resume or an essay. So these are a few of my favorite things. So
cool. And for everybody else who is watching, just wanted to quickly mention that one of our main goals of doing this is to also give you an overall structure on how to put together applications when you don't have a ton of time, right? So I see moderators are adding links on where to see more stuff. This Google Doc is going to have everything. So I will write my stories here. I'll write my resume here. I'll write my essays here. So I'll do everything here. So you can use that as like a skeleton when you figure out your own structure, regardless of whether you're applying to round 2 in the next couple of weeks or you have time till next year to do round 1. I think with that said, Maria, thank you so much for being here. Any last thoughts on this project?
No, I think this is a super exciting idea. Even if you don't submit it, it's a very useful.
Yeah,
it's a useful exercise.
Awesome. Cool. I'll see you on Monday. I'll see everyone else on Monday as well. And thanks a lot for chiming in. Bye.